living our faith in such a way that others might begin to say, why are you living and acting the way you live and act? So it's not kind of being in someone's face, as it were, but being an example. By seeing people, that, people begin to talk in the community about this St. Benedict's and the good work they're doing for others, seemingly without any interest for themselves. People begin to say, I wonder what's going on there. I wonder what's happening there. Why do they do what they do? That raises questions in people's minds. And it's very different than proselytism, We all have had people come to the door and you don't know what to say when your feet start going in the other direction because it's kind of an in-your-face type of thing. Well, that's not what evangelization is. Evangelization is a life lived in such a way that others are invited to ask why. And in perhaps doing that, to encounter Jesus Christ. I'd like to, by the way, one of the things I absolutely love are Proverbs. How many have read the book of Proverbs? I won't ask that, but it's fascinating, little tidbits of wisdom. There's some modern Proverbs that I enjoy as well. One goes something like this: if at first you don't succeed, skydiving is not for you. How many heard that one before? I'd like the buck to stop here. I need a few. Or the early bird catches the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. I have to think that one out a little bit. There was a 5th grade teacher, Sister Melanie Svoboda, who was trying to get her 5th graders to learn the Proverbs. And so she gave them the first part of the proverb to see if they knew the second one. Better safe than punch a 5th grader. A penny saved is not much, said the 5th grader. It's always darkest before daylight saving time. Proverbs are always kind of interesting. They are ways of giving little bits of wisdom. Well, I'd like to share a few bits of wisdom about something that perhaps as Catholics we don't know very much about. And that is the spiritual traditions that are part of our church. We have some of the richest spiritual traditions anywhere. Today they say that one of the most popular sections of bookstores are spirituality, and that people are more spiritual than they are religious. Young people say today they don't want any part of church, but they have spiritual questions. Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? What is the best way to live my life? These are core human questions. And all of us ask these questions. They're spiritual questions, aren't they? Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? What is the best way to live my life? And what many Catholics aren't aware of are some of the tremendously rich spiritual traditions that are part of our faith. For example, Jesuit spirituality that grew out of St. Ignatius of Loyola, a whole way of trying to live a life of holiness, or the Franciscan school of spirituality, or Redemptorist school, or these rich traditions of who we are as a people of faith and how we grow in our relationship to God. Now, I'd like to, in the second reflection, share a little bit with you about some of the themes that I think are common to the spiritual life, to the call for holiness. Pope John Paul II, Blessed Pope John Paul, before he died, as we entered into the 3rd millennium, remember that Y2K? We thought we weren't going to survive. Somehow we made it past Y2K. But here we are in the 7th great week, the year of Aquarius, this new age in which we live, the 3rd millennium. Pope John Paul had a number of goals for the church in this year, in this new millennium. He said, first of all, we have to work for the unity of all Christians, leading to full communion. John Paul had this tremendous passion to heal the divisions that exist among us as Christians. And the greatest pain of us as Christians is that we aren't able to share Eucharist at the same table. There are still these divisions within the household of faith itself. And that was one of John Paul's earnest desires in this new millennium, is that we could work for the unity of all Christians leading to communion. He said we have to apply faithfully the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. And let's hope that in this new millennium, in this new year of faith, that we will discover more about our faith and the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. And it would be a great time to get a compendium of the documents of the Second Vatican Council and try to read those documents again. Gaudium et Spes, Joy and Hope, or the Church in the Modern World, Lumen Gentium, the Light of the World. These are historically significant documents in the life of the Church. Sacrosanctum Concilium, the document on the liturgy. So, but John Paul's hope in this new millennium is that we would apply faithfully the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. He said, third, we have to sing a hymn of praise and thanksgiving to God for the great gift of Christ. What a great gift the Lord's presence in our lives is. He says we have to promote the social teachings of the Church, guarding human dignity and promoting peace. And he said we have to stir in our hearts a longing for holiness. And I hope that in this new year of faith, that this will be a time to stir in our hearts a longing for holiness. That was one of the first goals of Benedict for this year of faith, that we grow in a deeper, richer, fuller relationship with Jesus Christ. I'd like in this second talk to share a little bit about what I see are some of the common themes of all the schools of spirituality, and perhaps they might be helpful to us. The first is to seek silence. The second is to seek emptiness. The third is to seek an attitude of gratitude. And the final is to seek the bread of life. I think these four themes are integral to whatever school of spirituality in the history of the Catholic Church has spoken about. These themes are present. The first is seek silence. You know, the Archbishop of San Francisco, who's just retiring, Archbishop Niederauer, used to be the rector of St. John's Seminary in Camarillo. And he once compared life as a tale of two benches. It was kind of a takeoff on Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. He said life is about two benches. He says first, there is the bus bench, and then there is the park bench. Now we go to the bus bench out of necessity, waiting for that bus to come by, checking our watch to see what time it is and when this bus might be coming, pacing back and forth, looking down the road, waiting anxiously for that bus to come. But he says, we go to the park bench just to sit. Nothing is accomplished. Nothing is achieved. We just sit. Now he says, when we bus benchers find ourselves on the park bench, our knees start to move because we want to get on. We want to be doing, accomplishing, achieving. But no, that's not what the park bench is all about. We just sit. Franz Kafka said it this way, you don't even have to leave your room. Just stay sitting at your desk and listen. No, you don't even have to listen. Just wait. No, you don't even have to wait. Just be still and solitary, and the world will open up to you. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. One of the primary themes of the spiritual life is getting away from the busyness of our lives. You know, some time ago I was at a restaurant and I was eating with a friend, and at the next table was this fellow who was sitting with his family, eating their meal, all the while he was talking on his cell phone. I was at the health club not too long ago exercising on the elliptical machine, and next to me was this lady who was reading a newspaper. She was listening to her iPod, and all the while talking to her son, trying to get him off to school. Multitasking, we call it. I was on an escalator going up at O'Hare Airport not too long ago, and coming down the escalator was a fellow listening to his radio, rather talking on his phone, all the while shaving with his electric razor. You know, it's a time of multitasking. Not too long ago, I was on my way from one meeting to another, and I didn't have time to have supper, so I called ahead to this pizza place to order a pizza. And I'm a vegetarian, a vegan, as someone else you know in this community, only he's worse. So I ordered this pizza without cheese. Sounds horrible, but actually it's not so bad. And I went into parked in front, went inside, paid the bill, went out to the car, only to realize that I had left the pizza on the counter. I went back in, and the guy looks at me and he says, "Hey man, you better slow down." And isn't that the story of our lives today? We are, all of us, very busy doing this, that, and another. But all the schools of spirituality remind us, inspire us with the notion that we need time on the park bench, because life is too often about the bus bench. And so we're not monks, of course. We don't have hours of quiet and solitude that we can enjoy. Most of us are very busy. Some of you are raising children. Some of you are caring for grandchildren. Some of you are involved in this, that, or another thing. But all the schools of spirituality tell us that we have to seek silence. Maybe 10 minutes sometime in our day to step away from the fray, to get away from the busyness of our lives, just to sit. You don't even have to listen, just wait. You don't even have to wait. Just be still and solitary, and the world will open up to you. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. Seek silence is a core teaching of all the schools of spirituality. Seek emptiness. This is one of the toughest of the themes of spirituality that are part of all our spiritual traditions. Some of you may know Cardinal Benedict. He was the Archbishop of Chicago. He was a very famous person, well-known, well-regarded. As you may know, he contracted cancer and died somewhat out of turn. But the hardest moment in Cardinal Benedict's life was when he was accused of sexual misconduct with a minor. His name on the headline of every newspaper, even in his hometown in Italy. It was a terribly painful moment for him and for all the Archdiocese of Chicago, struggling to understand what was happening. I remember I was rector of the seminary at the time, and Cardinal Benedict called late at night the day after this broke in the newspapers. And he said to me, "Jerry, I'm very concerned about what the seminarians might be thinking, what might be going on in their minds. I worry about that. Do you think I could come and perhaps say a few words, answer their questions? What do you think?" And I said, "Sure, Your Eminence, please come. We would love to have you." Well, he did come later the next week. And all the seminarians, there were about 190 of them, and they were gathered in this tiered room on the second floor of our school building. And the Cardinal and I came into the room, and there was a hush. Not a word was being spoken. And the Cardinal gave a rather brief comment. And then he asked the seminarians if they had any questions. Well, no one said a word. And finally, this one seminarian very tentatively raised his hand. He looked at the Cardinal and he said, "Your Eminence, what has it been like?" And then there was this long, interminable pause. You could cut the silence with a knife. And finally the Cardinal said, "I was totally embarrassed. Totally. Here I am, the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, accused of sexual misconduct with a minor, my name on the headline of every newspaper throughout the world, even in my hometown in Italy, for my family to see. I was totally embarrassed. I went home that night, he said, all by myself. I went into the house, walked up the darkened stairs to the second floor where my room was. I walked into my room, and there I was, surrounded by all the honorary degrees and recognitions and gifts that I had been given by people all over the world. And I prostrated myself on the ground, he said, as if I were naked. But do you know, he said, I experienced a closeness to Christ that I had never, ever experienced before. You see, one of the ironies of the spiritual life is that when one loses their life, they find it. But when one holds on to their life, well, they lose it. Seeking emptiness is at the core of the spiritual life. It's when we are most naked, when we feel most vulnerable, that we can experience a closeness to God that we perhaps have never experienced before. Some of you may have had health scares in your life, or the scare of a loved one who may be sick. And there's a kind of a sense of being overwhelmed, that life is beyond us, life is out of control. But sometimes it's in moments like that that we experience a closeness to God that we have never ever experienced before. It's the greatest irony of the spiritual life that when one loses their life, well, they find it. And when one holds on to their life, well, they lose it. You know, the story is told about a woman who was in her mid-years. She was having a mid-year crisis. Now, none of the ladies here are there yet, but this woman was having a real mid-year crisis, mid-age crisis, rather. And she was struggling with the question, what is the purpose and meaning of life? She was so bothered and annoyed and focused on that question that she started to read all books she could find in the library on psychology, on spirituality. She was reading and reading and reading, but she was still struck by the binding question, what is the purpose and meaning of life? So she started to engage in small discussion groups with some of her women friends, and they would go back and forth arguing about life and its purpose and meaning, and she left it all still struggling with the question, what is the purpose and meaning of life? Well, everywhere she went around the world, trying to answer her question, she kept hearing about this old man who lived in the hut at the edge of the mountain just below the tree line in the Himalayas. She heard it once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times, and finally she decided, my God, he's the one I have to find. And so she took the plane that she could get, landed in Nepal, went into a hotel at the foot of the Himalayas, ready to seek the man who would help her to understand the purpose and meaning of life. Well, she burst out of her room the next day, out of the hotel, and started her trek up the mountain, not properly prepared with proper clothes and ready for the vigors of the mountain. And she was climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing, and the air was getting thinner and thinner, and she was having the hardest time breathing, and she was beginning to shiver because of the cold, not having been adequately dressed. And she was thinking to herself, well, I have to turn back. She turned, and just as she did, she saw a hut at the side of the mountain, just below the tree line. That's it, she said. That must be where he is. And she went up to the hut, knocked on the door, and sure enough, an elderly man opened and immediately said, Sir, sir, tell me what is the purpose and meaning of life? And he looked at her and said, Woman, would you like some tea? Tea, she said, I don't have any time for tea. Tell me, what is the purpose and meaning of life? And he said to her, Woman, we'll have some tea. And he brought her into his little hut, in the center of which was a little furnace on which he was steeping the tea. He sat her down at the chair as she was going on, telling him about all the books she had read and all the people she had talked to, as he kept steeping his tea. And he came up to her and he gave her a teacup and put it in her hand as she was blabbering on and on. And he started pouring her tea and pouring her tea and pouring her tea until suddenly it was flowing over like a steaming waterfall onto her head. "Ouch!" she said. "What's the matter with you, stupid old man? Can't you see the cup is full?" "Ah," said the old man. "Woman, you're never going to find the purpose and meaning of life. Your life is too full, too preoccupied. Woman, it's only when your cup is empty that you will ever find the purpose and meaning of life." The story very similar to the story of Cardinal Bernardine, that when one loses their life, when life is not so filled with things that preoccupy us, when we have sort of a freedom to experience a deeper sense of the purpose and meaning of life, that we will ever find it. Seek emptiness. Seek an attitude of gratitude. Some of you probably have heard of G.K. Chesterton, very famous man, very knowledgeable scholar. He was successful in everything he did in life. No matter what he touched, it was a success. But the biggest sadness in Chesterton's life was that he and his wife were never able to bear children. It was a source of great sadness for Chesterton. To compensate for that, every so often he would go to an orphanage to be with the children and to gift them. And the story is told that he was at one such orphanage around Christmas time. He had brought with him sacks full of gifts, beautifully wrapped and decorated. And he came into the midst of the little ones who were gathered in a circle, and he threw out these beautifully wrapped gifts. And he stepped away as the little ones went diving into those gifts and tearing open the packages. And he was sitting there watching, and at the height of the celebration, he picked himself up and he walked out of the room by himself. The head of the orphanage noticed him out of the corner of the eye, and so he followed him at a respectful distance down the darkened corridor, and he saw him duck into a room and sit at a table all by himself and begin to cry. The head of the orphanage stood for a while watching him, and he finally broke in and he said to him, "Mr. Chesterton, I must apologize. You have been so good to these children, gifting them in so many ways, and not one of them, not one, said thank you. I'm so sorry, Mr. Chesterton. I must apologize." Chesterton looked up and he smiled. He said to him, "Sir, I'm not crying out of some sense of ingratitude on the part of those little ones, no." He said, "Sir, when I was sitting there watching those little ones dive into those gifts, all I could think about is how good, how blessed I've been by God. Sir, my tears are tears of gratitude for how good and gracious God has been to me." You see, Chesterton had an attitude of gratitude. And that is at the heart, of course, of the spiritual life. A profound sense that everything I have and all that I am is a gift of God, freely given by God to me. To have an attitude of gratitude. I don't know if you've ever heard of a young woman by the name of Mev Pulio. Mev was a photojournalist in the cause of justice. She herself was a victim of injustice when her life and her passion, which was love of the poor, was snatched away from her at 32 years of age when she died of brain cancer. She was a woman honored at the visit of Pope John Paul II in Denver as a woman of great faith. Indeed, she was. When she was dying, all the friends that she had that lived on Arco Street, which is the street where she lived, would come and do vigil at her side because she didn't want to go into the hospital and be tied to all these machines. She had a beautiful marriage with her husband, Mark. It was kind of a Camelite marriage. And Mark would say that every time before she went to bed, Mev would take out her rosary beads and she would recite her gratitudes. All the people that she had met that day for which she was grateful. All the experiences that she had had. And she would go on and on, Mark would say sometimes. She'd go through those rosary beads again and again and again. But here was a woman who said, I'd rather die young, having lived my life with meaning, rather than live into old age and never having found any meaning in my life. She was a woman who lived her life with an attitude of gratitude, a profound sense that everything she had and everything she owned was a gift of God for which she should be grateful. To have an attitude of gratitude is at the heart of all the spiritual messages that are involved in our church as spiritual traditions. And finally, seek the bread of life. I'm sure you all have heard of the Sisters of Mother Teresa. They're a community, of course, that work among the poorest of the poor. And I know I've shared this story on many occasions because it's a story that moved me very deeply. I had an opportunity to work in Bethlehem University, which is a university run by the De La Salle Christian Brothers on the West Bank to help Palestinian young people to develop skills so that they can find work. It was established by Pope Paul VI. And I was there one summer working with the community there, and we had heard that the Sisters of Mother Teresa had moved into a house in Gaza, which is now a very troubled area, of course. And so my friend and I decided we were going to make a trip to Gaza to visit the sisters and see what their work was among the poorest of the poor. And so we took the rather arduous journey from Bethlehem to Gaza. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Gaza, but it's a very difficult place. Hot, steaming, congested, very difficult. Now, my family, as I said, were Lebanese. And my mother actually speaks Arabic. By the way, she just turned 100. I told Jean and Jack just in June. We had a wonderful celebration. Now, she speaks Arabic. My father didn't because he was an orphan and never really learned Arabic. The only words I know in Arabic are words one cannot use in public. On the other hand, when we were in Gaza, we were trying to find out where the sisters were living. And we were going on and using hand gestures and trying to figure out where these Mother Teresa sisters were living. Well, finally, someone explained to us that they had moved into a rectory where the priest had been shot and killed some time before, and they moved in there to try to give a Catholic presence even amid that violence. Well, we finally found where the house was, and I went up and knocked on the door. There was no answer. Knocked again, no answer. Knocked a third time, fourth, fifth, no answer. Finally, my friend and I turned away thinking we had made the trip for naught, when all of a sudden the door opened, and there she was, about this wide and about this high. And her name was Sister Damien. And she looked at me and said, yes. I said, well, sister, we were in, yes, the area we were hoping that, yes. We would have, yes. Well, after about the fifth rather stern yes, she kind of wilted and invited us in. We were sitting in sort of a living room, and the sisters brought us some refreshments and drinks and so on. And then Sister Damien came out of the back. She came up to me and said, would you like to go on mission with us? We're about to go and visit some of the infirmaries where we work. Would you like to go? I said, sure, sister, we'd love to do that. And she said, what was your name again? And I said, Jerry. She said, now, Jerry, here's some cards, and they're numbered 1 to 100. I want you to take these cards, and when we get to the orphanage, I want to pass them out so that we can see the people in some kind of order. Now, do you think you can handle that? Well, I thought to myself, I had a PhD, I was rector of the seminary, I certainly think I could handle that. At which point I said, yes, sister, we'll do our best. So we got into the station wagon, which they had made into a kind of ambulance. We got in the back seat, the sisters got in, of course, Damien got in the driver's seat, and off she went through these narrow, deeply potholed streets, winding and turning from one side to the other. We got out of the town and out into the country, and into the site of the first infirmary, and I began to realize the challenge that was mine. Well, there were all kinds of people jammed around this small little hut, and Damien drove the car right in the midst, everybody jumping out of the way. She got out of the car before I could get out. The crowd is jammed around the car so tightly I couldn't open the door, and I rolled down the window as Damien walked by, looked at me and said, go to work, and she went inside. Well, I finally worked my way out of the car, and started to pass these numbers around to the people who were there, mostly women carrying their children, and all of a sudden, I saw them. I mean, they were everywhere. The flies, big whoppers buzzing in my face and faces of the children and mothers that were holding them. And I was swatting these flies out of my own face and out of the face of the children being held by their mothers, when all of a sudden I felt it from behind my neck. I backed up a few feet, looked around, and there she was. Damien, of course. And she looked at me, she said, "Jerry, forget the flies. Pay attention to the people." And I never ever forgot those words of wisdom from old Damien. Forget the flies, pay attention to the people. You know, regretfully, Damien went back to India not long after that and died of a sudden heart attack, but a great woman of faith. And one of the things that you realize with the Mother Teresa sisters is there they are in the midst of tremendous poverty, tremendous sadness, tremendous difficulties. But what do? They go back every day to their small little chapel in the presence of the Eucharistic Lord, usually with a simple phrase, "I thirst," beneath the cross. And there they sit and pray. Usually the din of the street is coming into the chapel. You could hear it. But it's there that in the presence of the bread of life, they realize their relationship with the Lord and the mission that has been entrusted to them. And they garner the strength to go back out into the street to continue the work that they have begun. To seek the bread of life is an important theme of all the Catholic traditions of spirituality. And so as we want to respond to Pope John Paul II's encouragement for the third millennium to be responsive to a call for holiness, think about how you can glean in your life maybe 5-10 minutes of silence, sitting on the park bench every day, trying to listen, to wait, to be still and solitary, and experience the voice of the Lord in your life. To seek emptiness. I mean, not that we want to seek sadness in our life, but to realize that when emptiness comes unexpected, that perhaps it's an invitation to a deeper relationship with the Lord. To seek an attitude of gratitude, a profound sense that we are blessed and loved by God, and everything we are and all that we have is a gift of God. And to recite our gratitudes perhaps every night for the experiences that we've had during that day. And finally, to seek the bread of life, because it's in the presence of the Eucharistic Lord that we garner our strength to carry on the work that He entrusts to us, because we are bearers of peace and justice in this community, in the world in which we live. And so let's stop there and perhaps have a few minutes to discuss the second part. You are called, chosen, loved, and sent. Where have you most experienced God's love and realized that you have been chosen? What for you do you consider your greatest blessing? Are there moments of silence in your life in which you can seek God? What prevents you from seeking silence? Have you experienced the way in which emptiness, loss, suffering can be a way to a deeper union with God? For what are you most grateful? And where do you see love is needed in community and ministry? And how are you responding? So let's take a few minutes in our groups, again, to just regroup. And whichever one you want to talk about as a group, that would be great. And then we'll take about maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll have a final opportunity for questions you may